Thank you, Naomi. So the Torah says you should love other people as you love yourself, which seems to be the highest wavelength of social skills. This is not just social skills in order to have a cordial relationship with other people, but to really, really love other people as much as we love ourselves. Wow, that's what the Torah is advocating. And yet it's really hard to do that. It's really hard to get along with people that are not my speed, not my cup of tea, and even more so people that I was hurt by, that I disagree with. How does this law still apply to them? Does the instruction of the Torah still apply to them? So comes the Tanya to explain how we can practically implement this to a greater degree in our life, how we can love other people in an authentic way. And we said last class that the Tanya says that there are two basic meditations to think about, both of which are predicated on the belief that I have a soul and they have a soul, which is predicated on the belief that God runs the world. So if God runs the world and human beings are not just mechanical creatures that happen to spontaneously generate onto planet Earth, but if human beings are hand-chosen by God to be here, to live here, then that means that what's powering them is their soul. And if they have a soul, then I can consciously bring that to light. It's, for most of us, it's not intuitive to look at another person and think about soul, because I see their body, I see their personality, maybe I see a lot of things that I judge to be not beautiful in their life and their choices and their actions. So I don't think about their soul. But the Tanya says, no. The only way to really love them is to think about their souls. The only way to really do what the Torah is asking us by loving another person as we love ourselves is by making a conscious effort to bring to mind that this person has a soul. And then built upon that premise, he gives us two fundamental beliefs. Number one, when I look at another person, I think to myself, who knows how great they are in their source? And that we called respect. And number two, we are all connected and we have one Father. And that I called connection or closeness. So respect and closeness are the two things that the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, asks us to consciously bring to mind when we look at another person. I know you have a soul, and based on that, who knows how great you are? Definitely greater than I assess you to be. And we are all connected and we have one Father. And we spoke last time about how this can really positively impact our communication with others, the respect and the sense of closeness. We spoke more about respect. And before we launch into closeness and launch into our next step, and a more difficult step in the discussion of social skills based on the Tanya, I want to circle back to the idea of respect and share with you an insight that I heard from a rabbi, a lecturer, that really was like an aha moment for me. Tell me if it is for you. The rabbi said, imagine a parent confronts a child who took a crayon, or let's make it even worse, took acrylic Sharpie, took some Sharpie markers or acrylic paints that doesn't wash off. And when the parent was busy in the other room, the child took those Sharpies that don't come off, or those acrylic paints, and colored on the wall. And the parent comes back and sees what happened. And, you know, all the evidence is there, the paint, the paintbrush, the Sharpies. And the room now doesn't look like a pretty room anymore, a clean room anymore. And the parent is about to react. What if the parent had a flash of prophecy at that moment and saw into the future and saw that this little child of theirs was going to grow up to be an artist that was going to be of the caliber of Picasso? all of the sudden the parent had this flash, this prophetic flash. And now, coming back to reality, the writing is on the wall. No, just kidding. The painting is on the wall. What is the parent going to say? And how would it be different knowing that the child is going to turn out to be a tremendous artist? Just that question alone got me really, really pondering. And I think of this in my own life as a teacher, in addition to being a parent, because when you're in a position of being a teacher, you may judge your students critically for things like not doing their homework or talking to a friend in the middle of your lesson. But what if that child grows up, graduates? I teach in a high school, so it's not too many years until they graduate and become an adult. And what if you meet them and you see they've become a very, very respectable person? And now you're reflecting back on how you confronted them when they didn't do their homework or when they were chatting with their friends. Would you be proud of that interaction, or would you want to hide, thinking that you may have shamed them? And now you realize who in fact you shamed. You shamed somebody that's a very respectable person. So when we talk about communicating with respect, I think that this is a big part of it, that assuming that this person is more respectable than I give them credit for. And that doesn't mean that I don't have the right to speak my mind. Of course I do. We're not talking about walking on eggshells. Just like they're respectable, I'm also respectable and valuable. My voice is also very important. But sometimes we can kind of minimize a person's value in our mind because we don't agree with them or because we don't even know them that well. And the Tanya is saying, when you look at another person, first thought is, I don't know how great they are. I don't know their value, but they're very valuable. And now, how made that up the words that I use, or the tone of voice that I use, or the questions that I ask after I had that conversation with them? So that's a little bit about communication with respect. And I want to touch a little bit now about communication with closeness, this sense of who knows how great a person is. I'm sorry, that was the first thing. Everybody, we are all equal, and there is one Father to all of us. These are the words of the Tanya. So if I'm downloading that meditation, that outlook in my mind, and now I'm going to speak to another person, and let's leave out conflict right now. We're going to come back to it in literally 5 minutes. But just the regular conversations that I have with other people, if I knew that we are all equal and we have one Father, we're in it together, we're like family, even for the people that I don't know that well, how would that change the conversation? How could that enhance communication with others? So I'm going to open it up for a minute. If you want to unmute yourself or write in the chat box. And I'm going to pose this question. Knowing that we are all equal and we have one Father, would impact whoops, where is my Zoom? Sorry. Amy, I see you unmuted yourself. Did you want to share something?
Yeah, well, what I'd like to say, I mean, it would seem that I would treat people in a more friendly manner. I would, I mean, in other words, you know, if you feel that there's some greatness there, as you said before, it's definitely a reason for more respect of the person. I mean, however, you know, it definitely has to be a cautious type of respect. And I think that, you know, I think it also would reflect upon someone's ethical behavior. because it's holding a person to a higher standard.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah, a person's ethical behavior or unethical behavior may stem first from a sense of depersonalization, when I don't view them as real, or I don't view their pain as being real, and the closeness is the opposite of that. Yeah. Great. That's a great comment. That reminds me of a story of some Jewish soldiers who were fighting in World War I in Europe, and they were fighting on opposite sides of the war. Some were fighting for Germany and Austria-Hungary, and some were fighting for France and the Allied powers and England. And they felt that even though they were patriotic to their countries, they didn't want to be killing other Jewish people. And there was a story of a man who was in close range of a group of soldiers, and he thought twice before shooting, because he was thinking, are they Jewish? And what he did was he yelled out, Shema Yisroel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And the soldier, in fact, responded with the following follow-up phrase from the davening, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, and he refrained from shooting, even though the soldier was his enemy. But how much can you be the enemy if we're both brothers, if we're both Jews? So yeah, and by contrast, every soldier, from what I've read, has to depersonalize the enemy and make them almost seem like they're not real, in order to be able to harm them without feeling guilty. So that's a really, really, really wonderful point. And I just wanted to add to what Amy said. I think that sense of closeness or warmth is such a wonderful social skill. I think a very Jewish quality also. The warmth can kind of give us salt and pepper to any conversation. The same conversation said in a cold tone of voice and said in a warm tone of voice is a completely different animal. And the opposite, exactly. And when you're close with someone, you speak to them in a warm way. I'm so happy to be spending time with you right now. And for a person that you don't necessarily feel close with, you can also kind of insert that warmth for no extra charge. And it can uplift a conversation to make it into a warm conversation, again, in embodying what the Tanya says: we are all equal, and we are all brothers and sisters. If that's the case, I want to speak to you with warmth.
But going back to your example of the child using magic marker on the wall, a basic Jewish ethical principle is dan b'kaf zechus. So yes, you can't just scream at your child and make them feel unworthy, but you have to make clear to them also that maybe someday he'll be a great artist, but in the meantime, the walls are not for drawing, and in fact, have him help you clean it up.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sarah. And the same thing would apply to, like, I was, a teacher who's trying to maintain order in a classroom. I'm definitely, not advocating for lack of boundaries. But sometimes the frustration that may come out in shaming another person is that's another layer that's very tempting to go down. And holding tight to this idea that although this person made a mistake, they're still respectable can stop us from shaming another person when we're frustrated. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Also, I just want to make a quick comment. I think the way we treat children, you have to be extra careful what you say to them and because they take everything at a very personal point of view, and you can hurt a child greatly if you don't treat them gently.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And sometimes what we teach a child the most is how to react when we're frustrated. Meaning, but we teach them that by example. Okay. Let's tackle a even more challenging subject, which is conflict, which we did touch upon. So how are social skills important during conflict, or do social skills go out the window during conflict? And I would say that really the sign of somebody having good social skills, or an even next level social skills, is to be able to act gracefully during conflict. It's very hard because a lot of times we go into fight or flight mode. We go into the red zone where we're not thinking from our prefrontal cortex, and all of the things that we're maybe savvy at doing and relating to other people. Otherwise, it's hard to pull that up when I'm upset at somebody, or when another person triggers me, or when I've had an ongoing conflict with them. But also so important to be able to deal with conflict in a Jewish way, in a Tanya-based way. And in this case, the Tanya-based way is who knows how great the person is. That's principle number one. And we're all equal. We have one Father. That's principle number two. So, and Sarah, you brought up already the idea of judging favorably, being done l'kaf zechus, and that's something that's really important that we're going to touch upon today as well. So just to start off with a story about holding on to the principle of respect, again quoting the words of the Tanya, who knows how great a person is in their source, which means that I want to think about all the good things about them that I know of, and then I want to tell myself that all of that is not really a good synopsis of their greatness. Who knows how great they are, meaning it's a mystery. It's way beyond what I think I know about them. So the story that I want to share is of a woman who lived in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and she had a coworker who was Jewish, but not involved in her Jewish religion, and didn't necessarily see so much value in it. And the woman who was a Chabad woman from Crown Heights, she would always try and talk to her coworker about the beauty of Judaism. And one of the things that she mentioned was the beauty of Shabbos, and how Shabbos is a wonderful time when we put everything on hold and we spend time with our family, and we spend time on our spiritual activities like praying. And her coworker was a little bit skeptical, but this woman, we'll call her Rochel, she would keep at it talking to her coworker. We'll call her coworker Susan. So one time, Susan, she said, you know what, Rochel, I actually am free this weekend, and I think I'm going to take you up on your offer, on your invite of joining you for an entire Shabbos in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. I want to see what it's like. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that Susan was a psychologist. So Rochel was so happy, and Susan came to her home on Friday. The problem was that of all weeks, Rochel was in a big argument with her husband that week. And she was thinking to herself, I've invited Susan for all these weeks. Why did she choose to come on the week that I am just in the middle, entangled in this disagreement with my husband. We haven't worked it out yet. It wasn't like a simple quick fix. We've been, discussing it on Wednesday and Thursday, and now Friday is here, and there's still so much tension between us. And I feel bad. I feel like a hypocrite because I've been telling Susan how beautiful the Torah observant life is, and how Shabbos is a time to spend time with your family. And here I'm barely even on speaking terms with my husband. But nonetheless, that was the week that Susan had agreed to come. So she welcomed her in, and she just tried to put everything on pause with her husband. And Friday night, they made the kiddush, they had the meal, everything was fine. Shabbos morning, everything was fine. She and her husband just, said the minimal to each other, but they didn't really speak that much about personal things. Shabbos afternoon, Susan was taking a nap, and she and her husband were in the kitchen together, and they started to speak a little bit, and all of the conflict and tension and resentment started to come up again. And they started to argue about this core issue, this bone that they were picking. And they were arguing about it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then Susan walks into the kitchen, and Rochel realized that Susan had really overheard like a big part of the conversation, because by the time she woke up and came down the stairs and everything, so she really heard a lot of it. And now she was even more embarrassed, and she was upset at herself that she allowed herself to get into it with her husband when she didn't want to. She wanted to wait until Susan left. And she was just like, okay, what can I do? Susan thinks that, I'm a hypocrite and that we really don't have a beautiful family life, but what can I do? And Shabbos continued, they continued with the rest of the Shabbos, and then they made Havdalah, and then Susan left. Before she left, she said, Rochel, I want to tell you that what you said about your home and Shabbos and the beauty of a Torah observant life, it's really true. I didn't really believe it, but now I see, after experiencing it for 25 hours, I see that it's true. And Rochel was like surprised that she was saying that. She was like, okay. And Susan said, I know you're probably thinking that, I heard you argue and I'm a psychologist, but I want to tell you something, Rochel. In all of my years of practice and all of my years of just being a normal person with friends and family members, I've never heard a couple argue with as much respect as you and your husband. So that's a pretty unique thing, to argue with respect, to not let the conversation go to a place of shaming, of name calling, of really trying to hurt another person with your words, but rather to just share what is bothering you. And when I say just, I don't mean that that's a one sentence conversation. That could be a long, long conversation, but I'm sticking to the issue without trying to villainize the other person. So that is the first point that I want to make about integrating this idea of respect as taught by the Tanya, even into conflict. Again, by expressing my upset at another person, my hurt, my pain, my disappointment, without letting that spill over into shaming them, bringing up things from the past, villainizing them, analyzing them. It really could be a tremendous game changer. And I'm just going to open up the floor for a minute to anybody wants to share any thoughts about that. And I'll put in the chat any thoughts about arguing with respect. Okay.
Well, this is Shandel, and that was the most beautiful thing I think I've heard in a really long time, and I really thank you for that. As much as I've tried to study Tanya, arguing with respect is a very beautiful concept, and thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Shanta. Just to point out, and feel free, please, to speak or talk in the chat, but there's a very popular marriage counselor. His name is John Gottman. He wrote a book called 7 Habits for a Highly Effective Marriage. And he basically says that when a couple comes to see him or comes into his love lab, he has a certain, he not only has a practice, but he kind of connects people to sensors so that he can see what's going on in their body while they're talking and arguing. He says he can predict within 10 minutes of a conversation whether a couple's going to stay together or get divorced. And it's not about their arguing, but about how they argue. And he talks about these, he calls it the 5 horsemen, which is basically, you know, just being mean, being mean, and how different that is from a couple that can stick to the issue that they're arguing about. So social skills when it comes to, you know, talking to the person from customer service, or talking to my neighbor, talking to my daughter-in-law or my child about something that I'm upset about, can be, you know, this is what I'm upset about. The globalized put down would then infringe on a lack of respect, as we just said. And I want to talk now, unless anybody has something else to say about this. I'm going to wait another 5 seconds. Okay, I want to talk now about conflict with the second principle, bearing in mind the second principle from the Tanya, which is we are all equal and we have one Father. So in a sense, it's really leveling the playing field, which was one of the principles of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the predecessor, in a sense, of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. The Baal Shem Tov introduced Hasidut to the world in the 18th century, the 1700s, the beginning of the 18th century. And the Tanya was written at the end of the 18th century, so it was really popularized in the 19th century, in the 1800s. But the Tanya is just taking ideas, not just, but it's taking ideas from the Baal Shem Tov and unpacking them. And of course, the Baal Shem Tov is taking ideas from the Kabbalah and the Torah and unpacking them. And the Baal Shem Tov was a big advocate of leveling the playing field, so to speak, because what was happening during his time, especially in Poland and the Ukraine, is that there was a lot of cliques, so to speak, amongst the Jewish people. Although everybody was Torah observant, with the exception of a few, there were still people that were educated in Torah and people that were not. There were people that were wealthy and people that were not. And people felt justified in sticking to the people that were like them, that were most similar to them, to the extent that there could be different synagogues for different types of people. Part of that was just, you know, could have been practical as well. But there was the bad part of it, the dysfunctional part of it, is that there was a certain social hierarchy, whereas the people that were learned or wealthy or both would look down on the people who were not wealthy, not learned. They maybe wouldn't intermarry into their families, and they kind of looked at them as second-class citizens. And the Baal Shem Tov was very opposed to this. And he felt this was very un-Jewish, and that everybody is equal. And again, here the Baal Shem Tov's spiritual descendant, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, he makes basically the same point in the Tanya in chapter 32, which is what we're talking about, where he says we're all equal, we all have one Father. So how do you equal the playing field when you feel like you are better than another person? And let's forget about money, forget about scholarship, because those, you know, maybe we can understand they're not usually, many times it's not to our credit. Maybe we did have advantages that another person that's not as wealthy didn't have. But what about when it comes to moral issues? This person hurt me. I disagree with this person. I disagree with maybe their political stance. And therefore, I can't really feel close and connected to them because of their differences. So our goal is to try and, our goal today in our next 20 minutes of the class, 23 minutes, is to try and do just that, to try and equal the playing field when it comes to conflict, so that I can still voice my opinion if it's appropriate. I could still maintain my my judgments, meaning I don't have to think that everything that everybody does is right. I'm allowed to have an opinion about things and a moral parameter, but at the same time, I don't want it to be at the expense of losing the sense of closeness with the other person. So there are some really incredible techniques taught in the Tanya about doing this, having a conflict with another person and still feeling close to them. And to introduce this, I'm going to also share a couple of stories with you. One of them is a very famous story about John Covey, the author of 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, and many other books. And I'm sorry, not John, Stephen Covey. Sorry, I got confused with the psychologist that I mentioned before, John Gottman, but this is Stephen Covey. So Stephen Covey writes about an experience that he had that he said was really life-changing. And it happened, and many of you may know this story. It happened when he was on the subway in Manhattan. And on that subway, he saw a man with 3 children who were in his train. And the man was not paying that much attention to his children, which would be fine if not for the fact that his children were running around. They weren't sitting nicely and properly next to him. And they were even going up to other people and maybe bothering them or talking to them. And many people in the train were like looking at this man, and it was just such a strange scene. The father was right there. It's not like they were all alone. And the father was really doing absolutely nothing about his children who were not behaving appropriately. And Stephen Covey said he mustered up as much discipline that he could have, and he walked up to the man and he said to him, "Excuse me, sir, you may want to ask your children to behave more appropriately on the train." And he thought that he was just like really putting things in the best way possible. The man, who was like spaced out this whole time, all of a sudden kind of spaced in and looked at Stephen Covey and said, "You are so right. You're absolutely right. It's just that my wife, their mother, she just passed away. And in fact, we're leaving the hospital now where they had to, we had to finish up her death certificate and other things. And I am so sorry. I'm just in a daze, and maybe the kids are too, trying to swallow this. We're just trying to get home right now. But you're right." And at that moment, Stephen Covey said he felt so bad that he had, first of all, added more stress to this man's sorrow. And he also felt like, I want to help them. I don't want to criticize them. I really want to help these children. What can I do to help them? I don't know if he did anything to help them, but that was he was just describing his gut instinct, like, I need to help. And he says what he learned from that was when you add something to the equation, you add another piece to the puzzle, your heart can shift from one extreme to the other, literally, like swinging from one side of a pendulum to another. Naturally, you don't need to, try and mold your heart. It's just something that happens instantaneously. And to put it in in our framework, you see a stranger on the train, you feel no connection to them. They're doing something that you feel is inappropriate. You feel even less connection to them because the judgment comes in. The judgment is pushing the other person farther away from you. And what happened to him in that dramatic shift is all of a sudden he felt close to them. He felt responsible, not in a way that he had done anything, to contribute to their problem, but how can I help? I don't want to walk off this train just, thinking about you and imagining what you're going through. I feel like your pain, I have a little bit of your pain in my heart right now. And that was a huge game changer. So when we talk about judging favorably, which Sarah brought up before, what we're looking out for is what is possibly, and I'll never know for sure, but what is possibly a piece of the puzzle that I am missing that may be causing another person to act in a way that's hurtful to me or that I deem to be not appropriate, not moral. And if I could keep in mind that piece of the puzzle, it equalizes the playing field, and I can feel close to the person again, and I could communicate to them with that in mind, with that closeness in mind. And that doesn't mean that I need to condone what they're doing, and it doesn't mean that I'm not entitled to having boundaries. But I could do it simultaneously. Like a silly example going back to, children is a parent or any caretaker observes a child, hitting another child. So the gut instinct could be, that's a bad child. And once I already put that stamp of judgment on the person, so I've pushed them away, they're not close, we're not equal, we don't have one father. And now that's going to come across in the way that I speak. What are you doing? How can you hit another child? But if I look out for that missing piece of the puzzle that can equalize everything, then the way that I communicate can be completely different. So one thing to keep in mind, let's say, is that when I was a child, I also had low impulse control, because how do I know that's true? Because all children have poor impulse control. That's a struggle that's by and large dealt with all parents and caretakers. Now also, let me see what the child is upset about. They're probably upset about something. Or maybe they're upset about something that happened at home and they're bringing that into the classroom. None of these have to be true, but they all could possibly be true. Or I may want to probe a little bit deeper. What happened? Did something happen to upset you? Or you must be upset. And with that in mind, I am no longer any more valuable of a person than this 5-year-old child who hit. We're all equal. We all have our struggles. I'm going to add one more notch that's explained in the Tanya that equals the playing field even more. And we'll stick to this example of observing a child hit another child, which is so painful to watch, especially if the first child is more of a stronger character and the second child is more of a weaker character. It's like, it really hurts to see something like that. So here's the other piece that's discussed in the Tanya. I'll just use my age. I am 44. So I have had a lot of time and maturity and experience to work on my impulse control. And yet there are still things in my life where I act impulsively, I speak impulsively, and I may hurt other people, or I may make a mistake or regret it. I may send that text message too soon without, waiting some time to calm down, send that email too quickly. In fact, there has actually never been a time in my life that I've sent an angry email or text that I haven't regretted, haven't been ashamed that I've done it. At the time, it always seems like, yes, this is what has to be done. I need to send this biting response. I've never yet been able to reflect and say that was appropriate. I'm so happy that I did that. Never. I always regret it. Now, why doesn't that help me the next time when I'm about to do it and it feels like this is what needs to be done? This is the necessary course of action. And I think to myself, but Rochel, every other time you did that, you regretted it. It wasn't classy. It wasn't a classy move on your part. You always thought, oh, I wish I would have done it in a little bit of a different way. And I still, it's so tempting. I need to vent my frustration right here, right now. I need to hurt the other person in the way that I think they hurt me. So I have challenges with my impulse control as a 44-year-old woman. So actually, me and that 5-year-old were exactly the same. Yes, the circumstances are showing up very differently, but the struggle is the same. Keeping that in mind completely changes my feelings and therefore my communication and even my effectiveness with the other person. We are all equal. We have one Father. Because criticism that comes from a place of I'm on a pedestal talking down to you who's less valuable than me, like what's wrong with you, usually isn't absorbed by another person, usually doesn't cause them, trigger within them the angst, the healthy angst that would motivate another person to change their behavior. Usually that type of communication just forces them to quickly put up their defenses and figure out a way to deflect what I'm saying. So again, conflict, bearing in mind the Tanya's message, we are all equal. And I'm like, equal? What do you mean? How could we be equal? This person is so irresponsible. This person spoke this way to me. This person is so immoral. This person is selfish. No, we're all equal because we're all struggling, and we're struggling, so to speak, on different rungs of the ladder based on our age, based on our education, our experiences. But what if God isn't looking to see what rung of the ladder we're on? He's just looking to see how we're dealing with our struggles today, given whatever circumstances we have. And by the way, P.S., 99% of those circumstances were given by God in any case. So I can't even take credit for the circumstances that may have been positive for me. Okay, I'm just going to open it up for any thoughts or comments before I share the next point. I'm going to share one more beautiful story about that one piece of the puzzle that can be a game changer. And this story is about a famous Jewish singer whose name was Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And I could see Naomi is smiling. She's maybe heard of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach or listened to his songs or enjoyed his music. And Rabbi Reb Shlomo Carlebach says the story. He actually says the story through song. Those of you who know his style, which is still lives on today. Many singers today copy his style, where he sings the story. And he talks about how he was traveling through Holland on his way to Israel. He made a stop there, and he went to the great synagogue there on Shabbos morning. And as he was sitting in the back of the synagogue, he was listening to the cantor, the chazan, praying. And the chazan was doing a terrible job. He didn't have a good voice, and he was making mistakes when it came to the words of the prayers. And Reb Shlomo Carlebach started to judge the cantor, and he was also like really mystified. Why would they have made him the cantor? And the only thought that came to his mind was he must be a big donor to the shul, and therefore, when he said, I want to be the cantor, they said, okay, we can't say no to him. And that possible thought infuriated Reb Shlomo Carlebach even more, because he was thinking to himself, I can't believe that a shul would sell its soul for money. And he got so worked up by this possible thought that he actually left the shul and went into the hallway to finish his prayers. But when it came time for them to take out the Torah, he was like, that I have to join them for. So he went back in, and he saw that this same cantor was taking the Torah out of the ark. But what was interesting was that there were two people that were holding his arms as he held the Torah, one on each side. And this mystified Reb Shlomo Carlebach even more. And he turned to another person and he said, who is this cantor that's holding the Torah right now? And the person said to him, oh, don't you know? He's the famous cantor from Kovna. And he's like, no, I don't know. He says, yes, he was one of the most well-known cantors in all of Eastern Europe before the war. He was known as the cantor of Kovna, and he was taken to a work camp by the Nazis and tortured there, and he actually went blind and became, his health was compromised, but he survived, and he came now to Holland. And we always ask him, can you please be the cantor? Can you please sing for us? And he always says, no, me? No, I don't have a good voice anymore. I'm blind, so I can't read from the prayer book, and I don't remember it all by heart, so I'll probably mess it up. And we always would tell him, that's okay, we don't mind. Your prayers are so holy, we don't mind if you mess it up. We don't mind what your voice sounds like. And this week, for some unknown reason, he agreed to be the cantor. And that's why we also gave him the honor of taking the Torah out of the ark. Reb Shlomo Carlebach says that he wanted to literally bury himself alive, thinking about how he had just criticized the cantor and the whole shul for being selfish and shallow, and really they were so kind and loving. And just as he was about to leave, take off his tallis and leave the shul because he was so upset at himself, he heard the cantor say to one of the people on his side, who is that man that's talking? And the person on his side said, that's the famous singer of Shlomo Carlebach. He's in our shul today. He's in our shul this Shabbos. And the cantor in turn said to the person next to him, Reb Shlomo, I love his music. And Reb Shlomo Carlebach said, when he heard the cantor say that, it revived him. And he felt like, okay, it's meant to be. I was meant to have this experience of judging another person, and he was meant to have this experience of meeting me. And Reb Shlomo Carlebach goes on to say how he postponed his flight to Israel for a few days to spend some time with this cantor and to get to know him better. And I always think of this story because in that case, Reb Shlomo Carlebach found out a really, really important piece of the story that he didn't know before. This man was not a donor who had a bad voice, but was a very holy person who had gone through tremendous trauma in his life. We don't always have the ability to know the missing piece of the puzzle. But what we do have is the ability to push back on our natural judgmental thoughts that unknowingly put us up on a big pedestal and push the other person down on a low pedestal of being not valuable. So we could look down at them and say, you know, what is wrong with you? Isn't the correct path so obvious? And we can stay stuck in that, and that's natural, and we may have all the justification in the world. If we were standing before the jury, we could have a speech that was 2 hours long to incriminate the person that we're in conflict with, that we judge. But here we have an opportunity to challenge ourselves, to push back on that initial tendency. Because the Torah says to love everybody as we love ourselves. The Tanya says the way we do that is by thinking we're all equal, we have one Father. But wait, that only applies to people that I like and that I respect. How does that jive with the people that I don't like, that are triggers to me? Yeah, it applies to them too. How could it apply to them too? It applies to them because there are so many factors that are influencing this person to do the wrong thing and even to hurt me. That's their struggle. And I have my struggles. And maybe in my mind, in my estimation, they're not as heinous as the struggles of this person. But I have my struggles and I have my circumstances that not everybody notices, that go into and contribute to why things are challenging for me. So am I entitled to express my side of the conflict, my opinion, my hurt feelings? 100%. But how much different would that be if it would come with the respect? I don't know how great the person is. I know how bad they are, but I don't know how great they are. And the sense of there are things that are contributing to this person's destructive or self-destructive behavior. And I know how hard it is to win struggle, to win personal struggles, because believe me, I have plenty of my own. They have theirs and I have mine. And maybe I can express to the other person how they're coming across to me or to others. But certainly the only way that they would even be slightly receptive is if it comes from a sense of closeness. We are all equal. And just to end with a really short, so silly personal example, with my family dynamics, I try to get my children to leave to school on time every morning. And a lot of times they don't. And it's really upsetting to me and frustrating. And I'm thinking about how they're kind of going to come late to school. And even if it's just 5 minutes late, I get really, really upset and judgmental. Sometimes they're hanging out in bed when they needed to be out of bed 10 minutes ago, 10 minutes earlier. And initially I would start off by trying to just be matter of fact about it. But then very often it would segue into, yelling at them, shouting at them, which may work temporarily, but in terms of building a relationship or teaching them something, probably doesn't work that well. And one day I had an epiphany. I thought to myself, the time for the lighting of the Shabbos candles, it says in the calendar, everybody knows that you really have 18 minutes after that time for Shabbos to truly, truly start. But it's recommended, highly recommended, that a person light Shabbos candles 18 minutes early. Well, I know for myself, no matter what time Shabbos starts, if it's the winter or the summer, I never seem to be ready and completely ready at that moment that that the time for Shabbos has come in. The calendar says, this is the time that you're supposed to light. I'm never completely ready. In the back of my mind, I'm always banking on the 18 minutes, or at least a few of the 18 minutes that I'm going to go into. And I have my justifications. Oh, but I need to do this, but I need to do that. So in that way, I'm exactly the same as them. I'm looking for ways to push into time that's not my own and justifying it. And not having the self-discipline to say, no, this is the time. Once I realized that I'm the same as my children, it opened up a different way of looking at them and communicating. And I still think that they need to get ready on time and be out of the house on time. But the way my feelings towards them and the way that I express it shifted by equaling the playing field, by maintaining the closeness despite the conflict. So that's what I wanted to share today. And in our next and final class, we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll talk even more about bringing these ideas from the Tanya about social skills, about loving and respecting other people into our hearts. Have a wonderful day. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to join today.
Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy the-
you.
Thank you very much. Sei gesund. Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you.
I just want to say one thing.
Please.
Greetings from my Havarusa, Debrushi Liberov. She had such kind, wonderful thoughts, memories of you. So she asked me to send you her regards.
That
That's
is
all.
so nice. Please send her my regards back.
Thank you. Bye. That was a great class too. I'd like to have more of that for sure.
Me too. Thank you, Shanda.